Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim Pedig Vav Halacha Dalit. We're learning today Daf Samach. We left off on Daf Samach Amid Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amid, and we're going to continue today learning more details about the Piskei Aris, the disruption of an Aris as we had in the Mishnah. Now, I would like to right now introduce the following: that when we learned on Daf Nun Tes the din of Piskei Yaris, we have to remember that when you go back all the way to Halacha Aleph, to the beginning of this Perek, Ezehu Aris, and the Mishnah gave us the Shita of Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri, the Tana who holds that it was a mistake the way the others have the tradition of the din of Piskei Yaris, of the Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. According to Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri, a Aris, before the Piskei Yaris, in itself doesn't have a bona fide din of a vineyard. Eloma, the din of the Daled Amis is that what were to happen if you want to plant between the trunks of the vine and the wall upon which those grapevines are hung over, are trained on. So here we have the halacha that if you don't have Daled Amis, then you can't plant with Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri that holds it's bechlal not a vineyard. If you don't have Daled Amis, then it's not enough for you just to go after the avoida of a gefen yechidus, which is 6 tefachim. But if you have Daled Amis or more, then all you need to do is to distance the foreign seed 6 tefachim away from the trunk of the vine, and you're good to go. Remember, that's the sheet of Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri. Now let's bring it back to the din of a Piskei Yaris. We never spoke it out when we learned the Mishnah. But Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri, the din of a Piskei Yaris, in which the Mishnah says you have to have 8 amis and va'oid, and we learned the sheet of Rabbi Yechanan yesterday. Va'oid means and another tefach. What really the din of Piskei Yaris is, Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri, is that if you have, once you have this disruption, as we mentioned, let's say you started out with 11 vines and the middle one was removed, you have 5 to the right and 5 to the left. Again, Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri never has a din of a real kedem, which means you don't need Daled Amis to distance. But there is a din of Daled Amis, and that would be, listen, that if you don't have 8 amis and 1 tefach, then distancing a foreign seed with 6 tefachim is not enough. But if you have the shear of 8 amis and 1 tefach in between now, the left one, the leftmost vine of the others to the right, and the rightmost vine from the others to the left, if you have the 8 amis v'oid the tefach, then all you need to do, Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri, is to distance it 6 tefachim. People should remember that, because we're going to have in today's daf actually 2 versions of a story of a practice of a halacha of Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri vis-a-vis Piskei Yaris, and it will become clear that Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri will apply his shita that we had on halacha Aleph regarding the Aris proper to, as we just explained it, how we'll understand the din of a Piskei Yaris of halacha Dalet. And the question would really be, what happens if someone violated the din of a Piskei Yaris? They planted it within the prohibited area. What will be the halacha? So first of all, there's a machlokes tanoim, as we'll see, whether the item becomes asur b'hanoah, which means that the isur would be an isur doiraisa, or whether it's only asur midrabanan, and therefore, even though it's asur to plant it, but it's not mekadesh, it doesn't create an isur hanoah. Bottom line is, you won't have to burn that plant. B'chlal, we'll see in today's daf, not by Piskei Yaris, but b'chlal, when it comes to an Aris proper, there is a machlokes between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish, a machlokes Amoraim, whether what were to happen if someone were to plant a foreign seed within the Daled Amis of an Aris, Kishitas Tanakama, not Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri, has a din of a vineyard. Now, by a vineyard, L'kula Alma, if someone plants a foreign seed within Daled Amis of a Kedem, Aser Umekadish. What about by an Aris? That's a machlokes Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yechanan holds, and so we paskin, that an Aris is mamish like a Kedem. So Asad Umekadish and Reish Lakish holds that no, the din of an Aris, don't forget, Beis Hillel, really you have to have 2 rows. The whole chiddush is, even Tanakama, not Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri, that even though you only have 1 row of 5 vines, since it's trained over a wall, it's more chashav v'dinoi kedin kedem, Okay, that's a din derabanan according to Reish Lakish, which means you may not plant foreign seed within daladamas, but as long as you made the distance of 6 tfachim, aser ve'enoi mekadosh. That will be a very important clarification that we'll have in the bulk of today's daf. And further, we're going to go further. Let's see how far we can get. The Gemara is going to refer back to the case of the Mishnah. The way we learned it is where you had 2 walls, you had 5 vines, but they were not trained over one single straight wall. So there were 2 walls that came to each other, right angled, 2 on one and 3 on the other. So we had a machlokes. The Tanakama says all you need to do is the distance of foreign seed from 6 tfachim from the outmost vine on either side. And according to Rabbi Yoisa, to the Tana Rabbi Yoisa, you have to have dalad amis from the end of the vine until the wall for you to be allowed to only use the 6 tfachim. But if you don't even have dalad amis, so the remaining part of the wall, let's use the words that we learned, that we used in the previous daf, and becomes to boarding it to the vines, even though there is no din of an aris, and therefore even though you will distance it, 6 tfachim won't be enough. Really, what you need to do, as we'll see in today's daf, you have to begin the count of 6 tfachim from the edge of the wall, not from the edge of the vine, from the edge of the wall. And if we'll have time, we will finish the Pedic today, if we have time, and that the final topic will be going back to the next case in the Mishnah of a perach hayotzim and a gefen, that if there's a shoot protruding from a trellis, beyond the trellis, we know you can't plant under the trellis. So the Mishnah says you make an imaginary plumb line from the tip of that vine. Underneath it, you may not plant. Beyond it, you are allowed to plant. Beyond it, of course, you can only plant beyond it if it's 6 tfachim away from the trunk of the vine. Or if you have a din of an artist, you can only plant it if it's 4 amos away. Whichever one. But in addition to the din of 6 tvachim or 4 amos, as we explained, you cannot plant something under a trellis. What happens if there's a shoot of a vine? And we're going to clarify and add more details to that. And if not, we'll conclude the 6th chapter, God willing, tomorrow. Without any further ado, Chavra, Daf Samach, Amid Aleph, second line from the top of the Amid, the Elu Hein Piskei Aris. And if you want, if anyone is using an art scroll, go back for a moment to 59A1 just to see a picture of the case. The picture of the case, 59A1, that everything that the picture is describing is correct. But what we added in the introduction today, which will be extremely important to Chavte Gemara, is according to Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri in Halacha Aleph, the din of a Piskei Yoris is that if you have the 8 amos and 1 tefach, not like the Tanakama, therefore you'll be allowed to plant only in the 1 tefach, because you have to distance the foreign seed 4 amos. But Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri, once you have 4 amos, you can use the share of 6 tefachim. Same thing will be over here. When you have 8 amos and 1 tefach, then all you need to do is to distance the foreign seed 6 tefachim from the edges of the udders of the right and the udders of the left. But if you don't have that shear, then in Erechanama you cannot plant anything over there. Okay. Says the Gemara. The Elohim Piskei Yoris. First of all, says the Gemara, it makes absolutely no difference. The din of the Mishnah, Ben Shabana Goded, whether the wall was built first and then you planted originally the 11 grapevines, right, which you then trained over the wall, Ben Shanata or whether first you planted the 11 vines. And guys, don't forget that if you first planted the 11 vines in one row, Lebeis Hillel, it has absolutely no din of a vineyard. It still has a din of individual grapevines. And then you built a wall, and then you trained it over it. Whichever one came first, once you have 11 vines trained over a wall, it now acquires the halacha of an aris. And after it acquires the halacha of the aris, now the middle one got removed, became severed, whether it was an act of nature, whether it was a choice of a person, makes no difference. You're going to have the din of the Mishnah of halacha daled, which is that there is an aris, and therefore v'yesh kan piskei aris. What's the chiddush of the Gemara? Here we go. However, Charav Hagoded, what happens if the wall was destroyed? When all of the 11 vines were intact, makes no difference again, whether the wall was built first or whether the vines were planted first. If you had a bona fide udis, you only need to have 5. Here you had 11. After you have the udis, the wall was destroyed. So what happens when the wall gets destroyed? It loses from now on, going forward, mikan olahaba, ein kan udis. And let me go more than that. Same idea. If you had the 11 and you had a wall, whichever one came first, and the middle one got severed. So now you have the case of piskei udis. Prior to you doing anything, now the wall was destroyed. So if the wall is destroyed, you don't have an udis. If you don't have an udis, you don't have a din of a piskei udis. If you don't have a din of a piskei udis, that would mean, Chavra, that if you did not have the 8 amas and 1 tefach, and therefore there was an isur to plant anything in between, there was an isur. Now that the wall got destroyed, we don't say, since this was an area in which foreign seed was not allowed to be planted, well, that prohibition does not fly away. It does. It goes away. It disappears. The isur is only there as long as you have a piskei udis. Piskei udis is only shaykh if you have an udis. To have an udis, you have to have vines and a wall, or a trellis, or a pergola. We're going to just use the word gadeh. And again, it makes no difference which one came first. There's a lot here that's implied, and I want to read it at the end in the Mara folder. Everything we said now is Gavaldik. Now let's go further, which is that Rav Avdume, who is the brother of Rabbi Yosef, Boye, here the word Boye doesn't mean he asked, but he made a statement that in the case of Charav Hagoded, what happens if now, so the din of Aras disappeared, the din of Piskei Aras disappeared, what happens if now you rebuild the wall? Now, obviously, we're speaking about a case. There always has to be now the 10 vines or the 11 or the 10, whichever way. In other words, if something had a status of an honest, and then it lost it automatically because the wall, the fence, the pergola got destroyed. If you rebuild the wall, obviously, and then you train these vines back on the new rebuilt wall, so everything returns. So At Amar, that's a statement, Chazar Oris L'Mikaimai, and therefore, Ude Kavase, if the case would have been where you don't have 11, where you had 11, but now you have 10 with the space in between, for good or bad, with the 8 amas and a tefach or without it, again, even though it had the status and it lost the status, it reacquires the status. Ude Kavase, again, that you rebuilt it after the middle vine was severed. Now I'm going to add something extremely important now. So we say, Chazru Piskei Aris L'Mikaiman. So the din of the disruption of the wall goes back to its place, which would be that if you don't have 8 amas and 1 tefach, you may not plant any foreign seed, even though, like we explained yesterday, you have 8 amas and a half a tefach. That means that you can plant something in between these 10, giving it the 4 amas of avodah. You have that. You have enough. You have 1 finger. You have enough space to plant a little seed. You may not do that because of the din of Piskei Aris, which demands 8 amas and a full tefach. What is the Gemara implying with all of this? So let's learn the Marafulda. He made a statement, At Amar. At Amar is mamash in middle of the Marafulda, in the beginning of a line. It's around 17 lines from the top of the Amid. At Amar Chazar Aris L'Mikaimai, meaning the Ma'ishna Minata Hagafanim. Just like we began by making a statement, Loi Shanya, doesn't make a difference which one came first, whether you planted the vines first, and then you plant the Acharka Hagodet, or the other way around, since it makes no difference, that's key, Hachinami, if you had vines that were trained on the wall, and the wall fell down, and now you rebuilt the wall, it's just like Lechatchila planting grapevines and then building the Goder, and the din of an Aris will be there, and the din of the Piskei Aris will be there. Hachinami, Chazar, Obana, HaKoisel, Achash, and Echrav, Hamtsoi. However, this is the Iker, what the Gemara doesn't even say explicitly, that we're pushing it until the limit, but there is a limit beyond which this halacha will not go into effect, which is Aval, I Charef Lamtsoi. Koidem Shabana HaKoisel Mitchilasoi. If you planted, Chevra, 11 vines, had 11 vines, But before you ever had a wall, the middle one was removed. That means before you ever had an aris, you had 5 to the right and 5 to the left. And here we're speaking about a case where you have 8 amas. Let me give my case, and a half a tefach between them. 8 amas and a half a tefach between them does not combine the 2 separate arises. Even though when you build a wall and you train it over the wall, of course, now you will have a din of an aris. How many? 2. 1 to the right and 1 to the left. Ein lahafsaka din aris. You won't have the case of piskei aris. This is very important because from the lechatchila, all you had was 2 separate aris or arises in English. If you have 2 separate arises, again, I know that aris latanakama, you have to have a distance of 4 amas. Say them. But we're giving a case where you have 8 tefachim, 8 amas, and a half a tefach, which means you have a half a tefach space in that middle where you're going to be away, side from the aris to the right, both from the aris to the left, of 4 amas. And you will be allowed to plant there. So that's really what the Gemara is trying to apply, that you have to have first an aris of 11 vines or more for you to be able to have the din of piskei aris. But if there was never, now, once you had it, the din of 1 long aris, and then it got disrupted, even though the wall collapses, and now you rebuild the wall. So whatever was returns, which is amazing. Whatever was returns. So there's a chiddush there. But on the other hand, if you never had 1 aris, if from the outset, which means you planted 11 vines, you removed the middle vine, only then did you build the gader for the first time, and you trained it over the wall for the first time. They were never connected. If something was never connected, it can never be disrupted. You can't say the word disrupted. And if it doesn't have a din of a disruption in the aris, then all you need to do is follow the rules that we learned in the previous Mishnayos, which is 4 amas, l'tanakama, gevaldik. And now we're going to have, this is almost as good as it gets as Agadata in Yerushalmi, almost always. The Agadata simply relating, the story is us witnessing the halachic practice of a certain, in this case, Tana. But what happened over here is that Rabbi Yochanan was the one that had the Mesorah of what Rabbi Yochanan is the Amoira, the beginning of the Amoiraim. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is the Tana that we had, like we just quoted in the introduction. The Tana that applies the whole din of Piskei Aris differently. But nevertheless, there is a din of Piskei Aris, like we mentioned, that if you don't have the 8 amas and 1 tefach, then you cannot use the shear of 6 tefach. If you have 8 amas and 1 tefach, l'tanakama, you can only plant in that 1 tefach, in the middle, Vlad. And according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, then you all you need is 6 tefachim. Okay, what happens if you didn't keep that rule? You had 8 amas and not 1 tefach, even though you planted it beyond 6 tefachim. So you violated the Piskei Aris. Now what? We never discussed, in other words, did you only violate an Isur D'Rabbanan, but the product is not Kadosh, meaning in the context of Kilei of Kalayim, it doesn't have to be burnt because it's not Asur Bahana, or is it Asur Bahana? Now, there's a machlokes between the Amoyre Rabbi Yossi and the Amoyre Rabbi Chia. What did Rabbi Yochanan say was witnessed by the Meiser of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, something happened with Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yochanan, the Amoyre, was the one that repeated it, but we don't remember what happened. What was the story? So let's go. Rabbi Yossi, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he has the version that what was the Maisa that Rabbi Yochanan shared regarding the Tana Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Maisa Shesaraf Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri bin Nagnigar. Nagnigar was the city or the village in which Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri lived, that he burnt, meaning that some violation was done regarding Kalayim, and he felt that that violation wasn't only a rabbinic violation, but it actually he violated something on the level of Adoy Raisa. And therefore, you have to burn it. And Masar of what did he burn? Piskei Aris, which is the case of our Mishnah. And again, since it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, don't forget, again, the whole Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri from the outset does not hold that an Aris, 5 vines, trained over a wall or anything, it doesn't mamish have a bona fide din of a kerem. It does not have. But what it does have is that if you don't have the shear, in our case, 8 amas and 1 tefach, then you can't use the 6 tefachim. So even though this person used 6 tefachim of distance, nevertheless, he violated the din of Piskei Yoris. And not only is that a rabbinic, it's amazing, he had to burn it. Wow. Now the other version of the story, Rabbi Chia, b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, yeah, there is a Maisa. But the Maisa was regarding the case of Halacha Aleph. That Maisa, Shesaraf Rabbi Yechanan Benuri bin Nagnigar, and Maisaraf, according to Rabbi Chia's version, what happened? Bein Aris Ligader Saraf. What was the original case in Halacha Aleph? Forget about a disruption. You have 5 vines or more. You trained it over a wall. According to Rabbi Yechanan Benuri, it's not 2 rows. You don't have a real vineyard. But since it's trained over a wall, the area between the trunks of the vines and the wall, if they are not of 4 amas or more, is subordinate to the vines. Subordinate to the vines would mean that even if you're going to distance it 6 tefachim, you're not good. Normally, just distance it from a gefen yechidi 6 tefachim and you are good. Here you're not good. So that was the case. That Rabbi Yechanan Benuri had property. He had workers. They made a mistake. They planted. They knew 6 tefachim. They made it apart 6 tefachim, but it was in between the trunks and the wall, which did not have the daladamas. When he discovered it, he went out. Not only did he rip it out of the ground, but he decided to burn it because he felt you have to burn it. So these are 2 versions. And when Rabbi Yossi became aware that Rabbi Chia had another girsa, Rabbi Yossi was going to attempt to make a proof that his version must be the correct version. Now, he will not do it by challenging the halacha of the story of Rabbi Chia. No, that's for sure. Yeah, if you plant a foreign seed, Rabbi Yechanan Benuri, bein aris ligader, even though you gave it 6 tefachim, if that area didn't have 4 amas, you got to burn it for sure. But the only reason why people will repeat a story is if there is a novelty in that story. There has to be a chiddush in that story. And that's going to be the claim of Rabbi Yossi. Amar Rabbi Yossi, that Kashiyasa, Kumei Rabbi Yaakov Baracha, that I challenged the version of Rabbi Chia, in front of Rabbi Yaakov, that if my version is correct, it must be Nicha. If the story that was related was regarding a Piskei Yoris Saraf, you know why Rabbi Yechanan needed to relate the story? Because Divrei Chachamim Chalukim Olav. Because the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Yechanan Benuri. Where do they argue with Rabbi Yechanan Benuri? So even though we didn't learn it yet, we never learned what happens if you violated it. So the Mara Fulda already quotes from what we'll learn, God willing, on Daf Samach Beis in the next chapter, that what will happen by the case of a Piskei Yoris where you were not allowed to plant, but you did plant some foreign seed beyond 6 tefachim. It always has to be beyond 6 tefachim, my friends, because and forget about a vineyard. If I plant foreign seed within 6 tefachim, even of only a halachically single grapevine, for sure the foreign seed and the grape have to be burned. There's no question. But what happens if you planted it beyond 6 tefachim? So the Chachamim hold that Asr be'ena makadosh. There is such a sheep. You violated the rabbinic law, but it's not Asr b'hana. That would be, there are people that have that opinion. So therefore, there is a novelty to say a story showing that Rabbi Yechanan Benuri argues with that opinion. So he's more lenient in his understanding of the din of Aris. Okay, mitzat sheni, in the area where he holds that there is a prohibition, if you violated that prohibition, you violated a biblical commandment and you have to burn the product. But if, according to Rabbi Chia, the story was, now the halach of the story is true, but it's pshita. Why would we even have to relate the story? If what happened was that he burnt a foreign seed that was planted beyond 6 tvachim, but in between the trunk and the wall and the pergola and the trellis. So divrei chachamim chalukim olav, is there any opinion that will hold that if you did that you don't have to burn it? Of course you have to burn it. Of course you have to burn it. When we just quoted from what we'll learn, God willing, on Daf Samach Beis, that the Chachamim hold that by Piskei Yoris, if you planted it beyond 6 tvachim, you don't have to burn it. Yeah, that's by Piskei Yoris. But between the trunks and the wall, where you don't have 4 amas, fakir, the Chachamim hold it's a bona fide vineyard. everyone holds you have to burn it. If everyone holds you have to burn it, so there's no novelty in the story. It doesn't mean the story is inaccurate. It just means why would Rabbi Yechanan bother to share the story? He's trying to use that as a proof that his girsa, the story that Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri burnt his kalayim, was piskei oris, and not by the case of bein oris legader. That's his attempted proof. And now we're going to go to Daf Samach on the base, and the Gemara is going to say no, not true. You're right. Daf Samach Beis has a machlekes tanoim regarding piskei oris. But now we'll introduce that there is a machlekes amiroim, which came later, of course, between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish regarding the din of oris proper. Bein lechachamim, bein Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri. Let's read it inside. It says the Gemara, you're wrong, because that obviously when Rabbi Yossi made that statement, he didn't know. I mean, he made that statement in front of who? In front of Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha. It's amazing. Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha previously had taught us something that if Rabbi Yossi would have known it, he never would have brought this up. Because for sure, Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha rejects the proof that Rabbi Yossi made. What did he say? What did Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha share with us? That is Spalgun Rabbi Yechanan, that the Amoyed Rabbi Yechanan and his brother-in-law, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, that they have an argument regarding the Oris itself. Oris atzmai mahu, meaning what happens if you have an Oris and you always beyond 6 tvachim. Within 6 tvachim, of course, you have to burn the product. And you gave the 6 tvachim distance. What's the din? What will be the din? Did you violate the rabbinic, which means that post facto it's not asur bahana, or is it asur bahana? And indeed a machlekes. Rabbi Yechanan Amar asur umekadesh. And the beauty of our story is that whichever version is right, who was the one that gave us the story? Rabbi Yechanan. And Rabbi Yechanan Amar asur umekadesh. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar asur ve'ein umekadesh. So Rabbi Chia's version could make sense, that the reason why B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan, why did Rabbi Yechanan share with us a story that Maisa, that Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri in his city of Nagnigar burnt kalayim that was planted accidentally, but now post facto it became Asur Bahano, Bein Odes Ligaden was really Rabbi Yechanan's way of saying, aha, Reish Lakish, you're wrong. You hold Asur Ve'ein Mekadesh, Asur Mekadesh, and therefore Rabbi Chia's version could be correct. There is a chiddush over there, and as can Rabbi Yossi's version be correct? Okay, Adkan. Now, for those who would like, you can go back again to 59A1, whoever has an art scroll, just to look at the bottom right picture, because the Gemara now is moving on to the next case in the Mishnah. The next case in the Mishnah is, and even though there are different ways of learning it, we're going to follow one approach, that you have 5 vines, but they were not trained over a single straight gader. So the example that we will be using is that you had 2 walls, right angle, right, forming the shape of an L, one going into the other. Within these 2 walls, the owner of that land planted grapevines, but he trained 3 over one wall, and 3 over another wall, and 2 over another wall, or more. You have a total of 5, but they're not aligned. And therefore, the premise of the whole way we learned the Mishnah, Bein L'Tanakama and Bein L'Rabbi Yosa, is that Vadai, it does not have a din of an Oris because it's not straight. So what is the Mishnah talking about? The question is, if you go to the edges of the vines, if you have to look at the picture, whether you're looking at the end of the 2 vines, whether you're looking at the end away from the corner, the opposite side of the corner of the 3, since it doesn't have a din of an oris, all you need to do is to make a distance of 6 tvachim. So holds the Tanakama. However, the Tana Rabbi Yossi holds no, that if you don't have 4 amas between the end of the vine, which is in the middle of the wall, until the edge of the wall, all of that area is subordinate to the vine, even though it doesn't have a din of an oris. And therefore, you only need to have 6 tvachim, but you don't count the 6 tvachim from the edge of the vine. You can only count the 6 tvachim from the edge of the wall. Now, there will be more details that the Gemara will now add, even b'shitas Tanakama. Look inside the Gemara. So, Adashu Yotzim and Akoisel b'chulei. So says the Gemara, I want to tell you something, that even according to the Tanakama, that apparently is saying, all you need to do is count 6 tvachim from the edge of the vines. Yes and no. Let's qualify it. Let's limit it. V'hu, when do we do that? Sheyehei b'keren zavius arba'at tvachim kidei makoim. Now, the way we will learn our Gemara is, take a look at the picture on 49A1. If from the edge if you're looking at the wall that has 3, we're looking at the left side. If from that vine until the end of the wall, you have 4 tfachim, it's a new shir. Guys, 4 tfachim is a space that's considered significant. Anything that's less than 4 tfachim is not even considered significant. You know where we had this halacha, guys, if you remember? Hilcha Shabbos, by Hanocha, by Akira. Okay, but 4 tfachim. If you have 4 tfachim, so which means there is a significant area of empty wall. Indeed, the Tanna Kama says, like you see in the picture, all you need to do is count 6 tfachim from the edge of the vine. But if you don't even have 4 tfachim, then the concept of Rabbi Yoisa will be adapted by the Tanna Kama. And that will be, is that, you only need to have 6 tfachim. You don't have an aris, but you only get to begin counting the 6 tfachim from the edge of the wall and not from the edge of the vine. There is a concept. The difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yosi is the Tanna Kama, all you need to have is 4 tfachim, arba'ah. According to the Tana Rabbi Yosi, you have to have 4 amas. And indeed, as the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yosi Amar, that if you don't have 4 amas, you can't put any foreign seed, even though it doesn't have a din of an aris, which would mean b'poyel mamish, go to the edge of the wall. From the edge of the wall, count 6 tfachim, and there you can plant a foreign seed. Now the Gemara is going to have a challenge, and that is the cup that on daf mem ches amid beis, right? It's not we're on Perek Shishi halacha dalet today. In Perek Chamishi halacha gimel, we had a mishnah. The mishnah was not speaking about a vineyard. We were speaking about a single grapevine that was planted in a cleft, that was planted in a hole in the ground. One has to have 6 tfachim, which is what the Tanna Kama says, that if in that hole itself you have enough space that you can go away from the single vine, 6 tfachim, you can plant a foreign seed. The Tana Rabbi Yosi there says something similar to what he's saying over here, that if the entire hole does not have the space of 4 by 4 amas, then even though it's only Geffen Yechidi, but all of the hole becomes subordinate to the vine, and you may not plant anything in there, a foreign seed. If the hole has 4 by 4 amas, then you only need to go the 6 tfachim. Very similar to what he's saying over here, to the point that the Gemara is asking, why did he have to opine both on Perek Hey halacha gimel and on Perek Vav halacha daled? Why would we not be able on our own to learn his opinion one from the other? That's going to be the Gemara's question. And the Gemara will explain that each case has its own unique novelty. Let's read it inside. Rabbi Yossi Omer Chuleim. So Tanina Hacha, we're just going to say the 6th chapter. We learned in the 6th chapter regarding this L-shaped wall, the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, about the importance of 4 ames, less than which the remaining area is subordinate even to a single vine. The Tanin and Taman over there refers to the previous chapter, Perek Hey halacha gimel. Also, when you plant a seed in a cleft that Rabbi Yossi holds, you need to have 6 tfachim, but only if the hole itself has the space of 4 by 4 amas. So the question really is, why did we have to say it in both cases? Why would we not know one from the other? Answers the Gemara, we would not know one from the other, because ilu teninsa hache, if the Rabbeinu HaKadosh would have quoted Rabbi Yossi Shita here in Perek Vav in the case of this L-shaped wall, and like the Nisna Tamani, but he wouldn't have said it over there. I would have wrongly said that Havein Amnim, we would have said Hache over here. Al Yidei Shehi Elichas Aris at Amar Hache. Now, guys, don't forget that we're not saying that 5 vines that are not trained over a straight wall will have a din of an aris. We're not saying that. But don't forget, you have 5 vines. There are 5 vines. So perhaps, why did Rabbi Yossi demand 4 amas on the remaining part of the wall? Only then can you use the 6 tfachim. Epis, you have 5 vines. In the case on the Perek Chamishi, halacha gimel, there was only 1 grapevine in the hole. So Taman over there, al yidei she'eno hilchas aris. Hilchas aris here doesn't mean the halacha mamish. It means it's not shaykh to a case of an aris. Nothing is trained over there. But when you train something, the fact that the Tanna Kama training 5 over a straight wall makes it more stringent. That even lebeis hillel, you don't need to have 2 rows because an aris does something. Here you have a trellis. There's no trellis. We would have thought that Rabbi Yossi will hold that you don't need to have 4 amas, but just 6 tfachim. At Amar Mutter. So therefore, have a tzorcha misnei taman. Therefore, Rabbeinu HaKadosh needed to quote befeidish shitas Tana Rabbi Yossi over there on Daf Memches, that no, even though it's a single grapevine and it's only 1 and it's not trellised, it's not over anything. Nevertheless, the whole the hole, the cleft, is subordinate unless it has the shear at least of 4x4 amas. Now, what about the reverse? So why didn't Rabbeinu HaKadosh only write it over there? It also would not have worked because if he only would have quoted Rabbi Yossi over there, then I would have mistakenly said Havina Amrin that over there there's something else. You planted a grapevine inside a cleft, which means that the area down there is surrounded by 4 sides. It's in a hole. Perhaps that's why Rabbi Yossi holds that if it doesn't even have 4x4 amas, the entire area, all of it is subordinate to the one grapevine because it's a contained area. Over here, you planted it on the flat earth. You planted it on the ground, meaning it's not contained within anything. If it's not contained, maybe Rabbi Yossi would be more lenient. Gavaldik. Come on over there. Since it's enclosed, it's contained. Therefore, not perhaps, he says asid, but we would say that's why he says asid. Over here, one mistakenly would have argued, so therefore, beautiful. And now let's go weiter. Now we have time. The final case in the Mishnah was when you did not have, whether you had an udus or not, it's not important. You have a grapevine or many grapevines that are trained over something. But what happens is that when the vine is protruding from the wall, it can keep on going. Now, how thick is the vine? I'm saying that because the thinner the vine, the more it's going to, let's say, droop down earlier on. Let's say that the vine, Vlad, beyond the wall, let's say, is still 5 tfachim long if it would be extended. What happens is that it's skinny and the wall already ended. Nothing is supporting it. So let's say that after a tefach, it droops down. What the Mishnah said is that you have to make this imaginary plumb line to see exactly under the vine. You may not plant foreign seed. Of course, we're speaking about under the vine that's already beyond 6 tefachim. But still, in other words, the issue is under the vine. But if it's not directly under the vine, then you can plant. So it says the Gemara that there was a machlokes between the way Chachmei Yerushalmi, Eretz Yisrael, versus Chachmei Bavel, the way they understood the din of this plumb line. From where do you put it? When you have a Bavli, we learn B'maravi Amra. They said in the west, which means in the Holy Land. Here we're learning Yerushalmi. The expression is the opposite. There we didn't say in the east, we said over there, Dartan. Taman Amrin, over there in Bavel. They understood the Mishnah to be telling you something more chamur, that that you have to make believe that the shoot, like I mentioned, it's 5 tefachim long. After 1 tefach beyond the wall, it drooped down. What you have to do is you have to make believe that there was a metal spit that did not allow the vine to droop down, so it continued to go in the same direction of the first tefach, which means theoretically it could have extended itself 4 or 5 tefachim. And the halach of the Mishnah is that you may not plant any foreign seed under any of this imaginary additional 4 tefachim. That is how they learned it in Bavel. But here in Eretz Yisrael, Shimon bar Bava quoted Rabbi Yechanan from Eretz Yisrael that no, we're not so machmir. That ad makim shehu nikman. Look now, if like the example we're giving is that the shoot is 5 tefachim long, but only for the first tefach beyond the trellis does it still extend. After it goes 1 tefach, it gets weak, and therefore it droops down. Where may you not plant directly underneath it, the way it is? Gewalt. So that's one machlokes you have to be aware of. Let's go to Daf Samach Aleph on the top. Okay. Now, another din the Mishnah said regarding the perach, regarding a single shoot. Now, what happens if you have 2 trees? Remember that? And you have a vine trained on this tree. You want for the vine not to droop down. So you want to extend it over the neighboring tree. It's not long enough to go over the neighboring tree. So what we did was, remember, you took a rope and you tied the rope to the end of the vine. Now you have an extension, and the extension was put over the other tree. So the Mishnah says, depending your intent, accordingly, we'll know whether it's usher to plant it under the row part or not. So says the Gemara that Rab Chama bar Ukva b'shem Rabbi Yosi bar Chanina. He's saying like this. It's amazing. We never yet mentioned, okay, I can't plant under it. What's the it? We say the grapevine. The grapevine has two parts, halachically two parts. Really, there's three parts. There's the vine, you have leaves, and then you have grapes. Do we differentiate by saying, listen, it's beyond 6 tvachim. It's beyond the 4 amas. Elamai, you can't plant it because it's under a grapevine. Is that isur under any part of the grapevine? Or is that prohibition only if it's under the grapes proper, the cluster proper? That's subject to the final machlekes in this chapter. Rab Chama bar Ukva, in the name of Rabbi Yosi bar Chanina, says, indeed, you may not plant farm seed under, but under what? Only tachas eshkoilois, only under the grape clusters proper. We're speaking about of this shoot that's protruding. That's also the mekadosh. But tachas he'olin, but if it's under not the cluster itself, if it's under, he says, the leaves. Now, really, it's either the shoot or even its leaves. No, then it's not asur, meaning it's not asur umekadesh. It's asur but not mekadesh. However, Amar Rabbi Yosi nishtames, no such a difference is made. Afilu tachas ha'olin asur umekadesh. And guys, a big mazel tov, hadron aloch is there. Others will come back to you the 6th chapter, and God willing, tomorrow we're going to start the 7th chapter of Kalayim. All right, we're already. We can see the siyum in sight. Hamavriches hagefen, and as we'll speak out in the intro tomorrow, that Hamavriches hagefen is actually a mishnah that's quoted a lot in Chassidus regarding the ultimate meaning of a bracha. Vis-a-vis, we're benching Hashem in davening. How can we bench Hashem? Who are we to bench Hashem? The meaning of a bracha would be Hamavrich, which is to draw down. The avoid of making this world a dira b'tachtonim is something that we were entrusted to do, and when we do so, we're giving a bracha, we're bringing down godliness. Mazel tov, to be continued.